My father walked into my architectural firm's office 3 days ago, with his wife Linda and stepdaughter Paige, people I had not seen or heard from in 12 years, and the first words out of his mouth were not an apology but a demand. He said they had lost everything and needed me to save them. I stood there frozen, staring at these strangers who shared my blood, and all I could see was myself at 14 years old, standing in our empty kitchen reading the note he had left on the counter next to $200, and my grandmother's phone number, telling me they had gone to Europe without me for 5 weeks. My mother died of cancer 2 weeks after my 12th birthday. I remember sitting in the hospice room holding her hand as she took her last breath, my father Robert on the other side of her bed with tears streaming down his face. Those 6 months after her death were the hardest of my life. I walked through the house expecting to see her in the kitchen making breakfast, or hear her voice calling me down for dinner. The silence was suffocating. Robert tried his best, but he was drowning in his own grief. We ate a lot of takeout and frozen dinners. He forgot to sign permission slips. Sometimes I would find him sitting in the dark living room at 2 in the morning just staring at nothing. Then he met Linda at a real estate conference. She was a real estate agent, 10 years younger than him, with blonde hair that was always perfectly styled and nails that looked like they cost more than our weekly grocery budget. She was charming and energetic, everything our sad house was not. Robert started smiling again, started caring about things. I was happy for him at first, because I wanted my dad back, even if it meant sharing him. They got married 6 months after my mother's death, which felt fast, but everyone told me grief has no timeline. Linda moved in with her 15-year-old daughter Paige, who showed up with 7 suitcases and an attitude that made it clear she was not happy about the arrangement. Paige was pretty in that mean girl way, with straight dark hair and eyes that sized you up and found you lacking in the first 3 seconds. She barely spoke to me except to complain that the house was old and boring. The changes started immediately. Linda redecorated the entire house within a month. My mother's favorite blue curtains in the living room were replaced with sleek gray ones. The family photos on the mantel disappeared, replaced with abstract art Linda bought at some gallery. My mother's garden in the backyard was torn up and replaced with decorative stones and minimalist plants. Every trace of her was being erased, and Robert let it happen. When I asked him about the photos, he said we needed to move forward as a new family. Then Paige decided she wanted my bedroom because it had better natural light for her makeup videos she was making for social media. I could not believe it when Robert actually sat me down and asked me to switch rooms with her. He said it would help everyone get along better, that I should be flexible since this was hard for Paige too. I moved into the smaller room that used to be the guest room, boxing up everything that mattered to me and feeling like I was being pushed out of my own life one piece at a time. The dynamic in the house became clear fast. Robert constantly chose Linda and Paige over me. If there was a conflict, I was always the one who needed to compromise. If Linda wanted something, Robert made it happen. Paige could complain about anything and get her way. I started feeling like a guest in my own home, tiptoeing around trying not to cause problems. That summer before I started high school, I overheard them planning a trip. I was walking past their bedroom and heard Linda talking excitedly about Paris and Rome and Barcelona, a 5-week European vacation hitting all the major cities. My heart jumped because I had never been to Europe, had never really been anywhere. My mother always wanted to take me to see the world, but we never had the money, and then she got sick. I started researching places to visit, imagining walking through the Louvre or seeing the Colosseum. 3 days before they were supposed to leave, Robert called me into the living room. Linda and Paige were already sitting on the couch looking uncomfortable. Robert cleared his throat and said there was only enough money in the budget for 3 plane tickets and 3 hotel rooms. He said it had not worked out the way he planned. I waited for him to say we would go another time as a family, that maybe next summer we could all go together. Instead, he said they were still going, and I would stay with my grandmother Margaret. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I could not breathe for a second. I asked why I could not go, why there was only money for 3 people. Robert got defensive and said the trip was important for bonding as a new family, that Linda and Paige needed this time with him. Linda jumped in and said I would be bored anyway because they had planned activities that were more appropriate for Paige's age. Paige just sat there scrolling on her phone like the conversation did not even involve her. I went to my room and cried harder than I had since my mother died. I felt abandoned and unwanted. But part of me still hoped something would change, that Robert would realize how cruel this was and cancel the trip or find a way to include me. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I could not breathe for a second. I asked why I could not go, why there was only money for 3 people. Robert got defensive and said the trip was important for bonding as a new family, that Linda and Paige needed this time with him. Linda jumped in and said I would be bored anyway because they had planned activities that were more appropriate for Paige's age. I went to my room and cried harder than I had since my mother died. I felt abandoned and unwanted, but part of me still hoped something would change, that Robert would realize how cruel this was and cancel the trip or find a way to include me. Paige just sat there scrolling on her phone like the conversation did not even involve her. I stood there holding that note, and something inside me broke. This was not just about a vacation. This was about being disposable, about being less important than his new wife and her daughter, about not mattering anymore. I called my grandmother Margaret immediately. She picked up on the second ring, and when I told her what happened, she went silent for a long moment. Then she said in a voice I had never heard her use before, tight with fury, that she was coming to get me right now, and I should pack a bag. She arrived 40 minutes later, her silver hair pulled back tight, and her jaw set in anger. She walked through the house looking at all the changes Linda had made, shaking her head. Then she sat me down at the kitchen table and asked me to tell her everything. I did, all of it spilling out. When I finished, she took my hands in hers and said something that changed everything. She told me that when my mother died, there was a life insurance policy, $75,000. My mother had set it up specifically so that I would have money for college, for my future. Margaret had helped her fill out the paperwork. I was listed as the beneficiary with Robert as the trustee until I turned 18. The money was supposed to be kept in a trust account, untouched, except for my education. Margaret said she had asked Robert about the money twice in the past year and he had been vague, saying it was invested and safe. But clearly, if he was claiming there was no money for a 4th plane ticket while taking a 5-week European vacation, something was very wrong. She said we needed to find out what happened to that money, and if Robert had stolen it from me, there would be consequences. That moment, sitting at the kitchen table with my grandmother, I realized the betrayal went so much deeper than just being left behind. Robert had not just abandoned me emotionally. He had stolen my mother's final gift to me, the security she had tried to give me, even after she was gone. And he had spent it on the woman who replaced her, and the daughter who took my room. I moved in with my grandmother Margaret that same day. She lived in a small 2-bedroom house across town, about 30 minutes from my old neighborhood. The house was old but warm, filled with books and plants and photographs of my mother growing up. Margaret set me up in the guest room, which had a twin bed with a quilt my mother had made in high school and a desk by the window. It was simple, but it felt safer than the house I had just left. Moving meant I would have to change schools for my freshman year of high school. I had been looking forward to going to Lincoln High, where I knew people from middle school, but now I would be starting at Roosevelt High, where I did not know anyone. Part of me was relieved, though. A fresh start where nobody knew my family situation sounded better than facing questions about why I was not living with my dad anymore. Margaret was retired, a former high school English teacher with a sharp mind and a fierce protective streak. The first thing she did was call a lawyer, a woman named Patricia Hernandez who had handled my grandfather's estate years before. Patricia came to the house 2 days after I moved in. She was maybe 50, with dark hair streaked with gray and glasses that made her look both kind and intimidating. Patricia explained that if Robert had accessed the life insurance money and spent it without putting it in a proper trust for my benefit, that was theft from a minor beneficiary. She said we needed documentation, bank statements, anything that showed where the money went. Margaret said she had copies of the original insurance policy and the paperwork showing I was the beneficiary. Patricia said that was a good start, but we needed to move carefully, because confronting Robert too soon might give him time to hide evidence or create a false paper trail. Starting school was harder than I expected. I felt disconnected from everyone, like I was watching life happen through a window instead of participating in it. Kids talked about their families and weekend plans, and I just stayed quiet. I ate lunch alone for the first 2 weeks, until a kid named Jason from my algebra class asked if he could sit with me. He was into comic books and video games, and did not ask a lot of personal questions. We became friends slowly, and through him I met a few other people who were decent. My English teacher, Mr. Carson, noticed I was struggling and pulled me aside one day after class. He asked if everything was okay at home. I did not want to dump my whole story on him, so I just said I was living with my grandmother now and adjusting to a new school. He nodded and said if I ever needed to talk or needed help with anything, his door was open. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. The hardest part was the therapy. Margaret found a counselor named Dr. Alicia Brown who specialized in adolescent grief and family trauma. I did not want to go at first because talking about feelings felt pointless, but Margaret insisted. Dr. Brown was patient. She did not push me to talk before I was ready. The first few sessions I mostly just sat there while she asked gentle questions. Eventually I started opening up about my mother's death, about feeling abandoned by Robert, about not understanding why I was not enough for him to choose me. Dr. Brown helped me understand that Robert's choices were not about my worth, but about his own brokenness. That did not make it hurt less, but it helped me stop blaming myself. While I was trying to build a new life, Robert was in Europe. He called exactly twice during the 5 weeks. The first call came 2 weeks in. Margaret handed me the phone and Robert asked if I was doing okay in a distracted voice. I could hear laughing in the background, Paige saying something about gelato. I said I was fine and there was this awkward silence. He said he had to go, that they were heading to dinner, and he would call again soon. The call lasted maybe 3 minutes. The second call was a week before they came back. Same thing. He asked if I was staying out of trouble, said they were having a great time, and then rushed off the phone. Not once did he apologize for leaving me behind. Not once did he ask how I was really doing or if I needed anything beyond the $200 he had left. During those 5 weeks, I threw myself into school. I discovered I loved my drafting and design elective class. We learned technical drawing and basic architectural concepts. There was something calming about the precision of it, the way lines and angles came together to create something structured and beautiful. My teacher, Mr. Harrison, noticed my interest and started giving me extra projects, more advanced designs to try. He said I had a natural talent for spatial thinking. I started spending hours at the drafting table in the classroom after school, designing houses and buildings from my imagination. Mr. Liebervox, the Tyson, Harrison would sit with me sometimes and point out where I could improve a roofline or make better use of space. He told me about architecture programs at universities, showed me magazines with incredible buildings from around the world. For the first time since my mother died, I felt excited about something, like maybe I had a future worth working toward. The 5 weeks ended and Robert came home. He called Margaret and told her he was coming to pick me up the next day. Margaret said we needed to have a conversation first and invited him to come to her house. He showed up at 10 in the morning looking tanned and relaxed. Linda and Paige waited in the car. Margaret and I sat on the couch in the living room. Patricia, the lawyer, was there too, sitting in the armchair with a folder on her lap. Robert looked surprised to see her. He asked what this was about, and Margaret said it was about the $75,000 from my mother's life insurance policy. The color drained from Robert's face. He started to say something, but Margaret cut him off. She told him we knew I was the beneficiary, that the money was supposed to be held in trust for my education and future. She asked him directly where the money was. Robert got defensive immediately. He said the money was his to manage as trustee, that he had made decisions in my best interest. Patricia spoke up then, her voice calm but firm. She said the law was clear that a trustee has a fiduciary duty to the beneficiary, that spending trust funds on personal expenses is illegal. She asked again where the money was. Robert's face turned red. He stood up and started yelling. He said he deserved that money, that he had been left alone to raise a kid after his wife died, that those 6 months before he met Linda were the hardest of his life. He said Linda and Paige deserved a good life, that he had a right to be happy, that I was old enough to understand that sometimes sacrifices had to be made. He said the money was spent, $40,000 on the wedding, on renovating the house to make it nice for his new family, on the vacation they just took. The remaining $35,000 was invested in Linda's real estate business. The room went silent. Patricia asked if he had any documentation of these expenditures. Robert said it was none of our business. Patricia informed him that actually, It was very much my business, that this constituted theft from a minor beneficiary, and that we had grounds to press criminal charges and pursue a civil lawsuit. I sat there watching my father, this man who was supposed to protect me, and felt nothing but cold disgust. He had stolen my mother's gift to me and spent it on replacing her and making sure I knew I did not matter anymore. Then Robert did something I will never forget. He looked at me, his face twisted with anger, and said if I was going to be this ungrateful, if I was going to side with Margaret and lawyers against him, then maybe I should just stay here permanently. He said he was done trying to make me happy, that nothing he did was ever enough for me. He told Margaret she could keep me, that he would sign whatever papers she needed. Patricia pulled a temporary custody agreement out of her folder, something she had prepared just in case. Robert signed it right there without even reading it, his hand shaking with rage. He said I was Margaret's problem now, and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Through the window, I watched him get in the car where Linda and Paige were waiting. I could see Paige laughing at something on her phone, completely unaware or uncaring that her stepbrother had just been disowned. Margaret put her arm around me and I realized I was shaking. She said something I needed to hear right then. She said Robert had just shown me exactly who he was, and that it was not my job to fix him or make him love me the right way. She said she was proud to have me, that I was wanted here, and that we would build a good life together. That night I cried, but they were different tears. Not just grief, but also relief. I did not have to go back to that house where I was not wanted. I did not have to watch Robert choose Linda and Paige over me anymore. I had been set free, even if it hurt. The custody arrangement became permanent 3 months later. Robert paid minimal child support, exactly $300 a month, and only after Patricia threatened to pursue the insurance money theft in court. He made it clear through his lawyer that he wanted no contact beyond the legal obligations. That was fine with me. I was done hoping he would suddenly become the father I needed. Robert did show up for awkward visits every few months, usually lasting about 30 minutes. He would take me to a diner. We would sit across from each other in uncomfortable silence, and he would ask surface-level questions about school. I gave short answers. He never apologized, never acknowledged what he had done. These visits felt like he was checking a box, fulfilling some minimum requirement, so he could tell himself he was still being a father. After the first year, the visits became less frequent. By my junior year of high school, I only saw him twice that whole year. Living with Margaret was the opposite of living with Robert and Linda. She actually cared about my life. She came to my school events, helped me with homework, taught me how to cook actual meals instead of surviving on frozen food. We developed routines. Saturday mornings we would go to the farmer's market together. Sunday evenings we would watch old movies and she would tell me stories about my mother growing up. Margaret had a way of keeping my mother's memory alive without making it painful. I poured everything into school and into architecture. I spent hours in Mr. Harrison's classroom working on increasingly complex designs. He introduced me to computer-aided design software, and I became obsessed, staying up late creating three-dimensional models of buildings I imagined. My sophomore year, I entered a regional high school design competition with a proposal for a sustainable community center. I did not expect to win, but I took third place out of 47 entries. Margaret drove me 2 hours to the award ceremony and cried when they called my name. That success pushed me to work harder. Junior year, I won first place in the state competition with a design for affordable modular housing. The local newspaper did a small article about it with my photo. Mr. Bonkin, Harrison helped me start building a portfolio of my work to submit with college applications. He told me I had real talent, that I could have a serious career in architecture if I wanted it. Socially, high school got better too. I stayed friends with Jason and his group. Senior year, I started dating a girl named Sarah from my calculus class. She had red hair and freckles and this laugh that made everyone around her smile. She was the first person outside of Margaret and Dr. Brown that I really opened up to about my family situation. She listened without judgment and never made me feel broken. Living with Margaret was the opposite of living with Robert and Linda. She actually cared about my life. She came to my school events, helped me with homework, taught me how to cook actual meals instead of surviving on frozen food. We developed routines. Saturday mornings we would go to the farmer's market together. Sunday evenings we would watch old movies and she would tell me stories about my mother growing up. Margaret had a way of keeping my mother's memory alive without making it painful. I applied to 6 universities with strong architecture programs. Margaret helped me with the application essays, reading draft after draft without complaint. I wrote about losing my mother, about finding purpose in design, about wanting to create spaces where people felt safe and valued. The applications asked about challenges I had overcome, and I had plenty of material, though I kept the details vague. In March of my senior year, I got acceptance letters from 4 schools. The best one was from a top-ranked architecture program 3 hours away, and they offered me a full academic scholarship covering tuition, fees, and a stipend for housing. I would have to take out small loans for living expenses, but the scholarship was life-changing. Margaret and I celebrated by going to her favorite Italian restaurant. We would spend hours talking about everything, our dreams and fears and plans for the future. She helped me believe I could be happy, that what Robert did to me did not have to define my whole life. 2 weeks before graduation, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. I answered, and it was Robert. He asked if I could come to Sunday dinner at their house, said there was something important to discuss. My gut told me not to go, but some part of me still hoped maybe he wanted to reconcile, to be part of my graduation. I agreed. I sat there in silence, processing what they had just told me. Part of me felt a flicker of sympathy, especially for Paige's daughter, who was innocent in all this. But mostly I felt cold anger at the entitlement, at the assumption that after everything they had done to me, I owed them anything. We sat down to eat and made strained small talk for 20 minutes. Then Robert cleared his throat and said he had heard about my scholarship. He said he was glad I was doing well academically. I waited, sensing this was leading somewhere. Then he said it. He asked me to give up the scholarship and attend the community college in town instead. He said since I would not need the scholarship money, the equivalent amount could be used to send Paige to the private university she wanted to attend. I sat there stunned. Paige was sitting across from me, barely making eye contact, picking at her food. She had graduated high school by the skin of her teeth, with a 2.1 grade point average. She had not gotten any scholarship offers. The private university Robert was talking about cost over $50,000 a year. I asked him if he was serious. He said it was only fair because he had invested so much in raising me, that family helps family. Linda jumped in and said I should be grateful Robert was even offering to let me live at home and go to community college, since he had no legal obligation to me anymore. She actually used those words, no legal obligation, like I was some stranger he had done a favor for. I looked at Paige, waiting for her to say something, to tell them this was insane. She just shrugged and said she really wanted to go to that school, that it had a good sorority scene. Socially, high school got better too. I stayed friends with Jason and his group. Senior year, I started dating a girl named Sarah from my calculus class. She had red hair and freckles and this laugh that made everyone around her smile. She was the first person outside of Margaret and Dr. Brown that I really opened up to about my family situation. She listened without judgment and never made me feel broken. I asked Robert directly what happened to the $35,000 he said was invested in Linda's real estate business. Linda's face went tight. Robert said that was not relevant, that the business had some setbacks, but they were working through it. I pressed harder. I said if they had $35,000 of my money, they could use that for Paige's tuition. Robert exploded. He stood up and slammed his hand on the table. He said that money was long gone, that I needed to stop living in the past and be a team player. He said if I insisted on taking that scholarship and going to that university, I would be completely disowned. No relationship, no contact, nothing. He said I needed to choose right now between my selfish ambitions and being part of this family. Linda sat there nodding along like this made perfect sense. Paige looked annoyed, like I was being difficult over nothing. I stood up slowly and looked my father in the eye. I said he had disowned me when I was 14 years old, when he left me behind and chose them over me. I said this conversation was just making it official. I told him he stole from me, abandoned me, and was now trying to manipulate me into giving up my future for people who had never cared about me. Linda's face turned red and she said, I was selfish, just like my mother had been. She actually insulted my dead mother, the woman whose insurance money they had stolen and whose memory they had erased from that house. Paige laughed, this cruel little laugh, and called me a loser who would probably fail out of college anyway. I walked to the door. Robert followed me, still yelling about how I was making a huge mistake, how I would regret this. I turned around one last time and said, I regretted nothing except wasting years hoping he would be the father I deserved. I told him to lose my number and never contact me again. I walked out to my car, and Margaret was sitting in the driver's seat. I had told her where I was going and she had insisted on coming with me, waiting outside just in case. She took one look at my face and said we were leaving. As we drove away, she told me she was proud of me for standing up for myself, for choosing my future over people who did not deserve me. Robert never called again. He did not show up to my high school graduation 2 weeks later. Margaret sat in the audience alone, cheering louder than anyone when they called my name. That day I realized family is not about blood. It is about who shows up. College was everything I hoped it would be. The architecture program was intense and demanding, but I loved every minute of it. I spent long nights in the studio working on projects, surrounded by other students who were just as passionate about design as I was. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I made good friends, people who became like family. My roommate Tyler was from Colorado, a structural engineering major who became my best friend. We stayed up late talking about building designs and grabbed breakfast together before early classes. There was a whole group of us in the architecture building who became close, supporting each other through brutal project deadlines and final reviews. Margaret drove up to visit me once a month. She would take me and Tyler out to dinner, and we would catch her up on everything. She attended my design presentations when parents were invited, always sitting in the front row. Robert's absence at these events stopped hurting after a while. I had stopped expecting him to show up. I dated a few people in college, but nothing serious until junior year when I met Amanda at an architecture and engineering conference on campus. She was a structural engineering student from another university, sharp and funny with dark curly hair and eyes that lit up when she talked about load-bearing calculations. We spent the whole conference talking, exchanged numbers, and started a long-distance relationship that somehow worked despite being 3 hours apart. Academically, I excelled. I graduated top of my class with multiple awards. Margaret made the trip for graduation, bringing flowers and a card with a long letter inside, telling me how proud she was. Amanda was there too, having driven in the night before. The ceremony felt complete without Robert there. I had built a life that he was not part of, and I was genuinely happy. I got hired by a prestigious architecture firm right out of college, starting as a junior designer. The work was challenging and I was low in the hierarchy, but I was learning from talented people and working on real projects. I found my niche in sustainable residential design, creating homes that were both beautiful and environmentally responsible. My design started winning internal competitions at the firm. By 25, I was promoted to senior designer. Then Margaret got sick. It started with small things, forgetting words or where she put her keys. The diagnosis was early onset dementia. She was only 72. I moved back to be closer to her, transferred to a branch of my firm in her city. The next 3 years I watched her slowly fade, the woman who saved me disappearing piece by piece. I made sure she had the best care, spent every weekend with her, held her hand through the confusion and fear. She passed away peacefully when I was 28, in a care facility where they treated her with dignity. I was with her at the end, along with a few of her old friends from her teaching days. At her funeral, the church was full of former students and colleagues who shared stories about how she had impacted their lives. Robert did not come. I had not bothered to tell him she was dying. Margaret left me her house and her savings, about $80,000 she had carefully managed on a teacher's pension. More importantly, she left me a letter I found in her dresser drawer after she passed. She wrote about how taking me in was not a burden but a gift, how watching me grow into a good man was one of her greatest joys. She said she was proud of me for choosing kindness over bitterness, for building a life full of love, despite what Robert had done. She told me to be happy, to find someone who cherished me, and to remember that I was always enough just as I was. Losing her hurt worse than losing Robert ever had, because Margaret had been real family. But her death did not destroy me the way my mother's death had when I was 12. I had good friends, a therapist I still saw occasionally, and Amanda, who flew in for the funeral and stayed for a week to help me sort through Margaret's things. Amanda and I got married when I was 30. The wedding was small and perfect, just close friends and Amanda's family who had welcomed me without question. We honeymooned in Portugal, walking through beautiful old cities and eating incredible food. I did not invite Robert or send him an announcement. He was not part of my life anymore, and I had no interest in changing that. By 32, I had enough experience and savings to start my own firm. I partnered with Tyler from college, who had become a structural engineer, and we launched a company specializing in eco-friendly custom homes. The business grew faster than we expected. Turns out there was a market for beautiful, sustainable housing, and our designs were innovative enough to get attention. We were featured in architecture magazines, won awards, built homes for clients who became friends. Amanda and I had a daughter when I was 33, Emma. Holding her for the first time in the hospital, I made a promise that she would always know she was wanted, that I would show up for every moment of her life, that she would never question whether she mattered. She was 3 now, funny and curious, obsessed with dinosaurs and building blocks. Life was genuinely good. I had built something real. The firm was successful, my marriage was strong, my daughter was healthy and happy. I had friends I trusted and work I loved. The pain from my childhood had not disappeared, but it did not define me anymore. I had proven to myself that Robert's rejection said nothing about my worth. Then, on a regular Tuesday afternoon, everything shifted. I was in my office reviewing blueprints for a new project when my assistant Sarah buzzed my intercom. She said there were 3 people in the lobby claiming to be my family and demanding to see me. My first thought was that someone had made a mistake. Then she said their names: Robert, Linda, and Paige. My heart stopped. 12 years of complete silence, and they just showed up at my office. I told Sarah to ask them to leave. She said they were causing a scene, that Linda was crying loudly, and Robert was insisting it was a life-or-death emergency. Other clients in the lobby were starting to stare. Against every instinct telling me to call security, I agreed to see them. I needed to know what could possibly bring them here after all this time. Sarah led them back to my office. I barely recognized them. Robert looked 20 years older than the last time I saw him, his hair completely gray and thinning, his face haggard with deep lines. He had lost weight in an unhealthy way, his clothes hanging loose on his frame. Linda looked worse. The polished appearance was gone, replaced with dated clothes that looked worn and cheap. Her hair was badly dyed with gray roots showing, her makeup caked on to hide how exhausted she looked. Paige looked bitter and tired, her face harder than I remembered, dark circles under her eyes. Against every instinct telling me to call security, I agreed to see them. I needed to know what could possibly bring them here after all this time. Paige looked bitter and tired, her face harder than I remembered, dark circles under her eyes. The audacity of that statement, after 12 years of silence, hit me like a physical blow. I leaned back in my chair and told them to explain, carefully keeping my voice neutral, even though I felt rage building in my chest. They walked into my office and all 3 started talking at once, their voices overlapping in desperation. Linda was crying, Robert was pleading, Paige looked angry. I held up my hand and told them to stop. I sat down behind my desk and told them they had 5 minutes to explain why they were here, and then they told me everything. The bank foreclosed 5 years ago. Robert jumped in, his voice defensive. He said he lost his job 3 years ago when his company downsized. He was in his 50s by then and could not find another position paying anywhere close to what he had been making. He worked a series of low-paying jobs, warehouse work and retail, barely making enough to cover rent on the small apartment they moved into after losing the house. Paige spoke up then, her voice bitter. She said she had dropped out of that private university after 1 year because they could not afford it anymore, not even with loans. She never finished any degree. She had been bouncing between minimum wage jobs ever since, retail and food service, never able to get ahead. Then she got pregnant at 25. The father was some guy she had dated for a few months, who disappeared the moment she told him. She had a daughter now, 7 years old, being raised in poverty. Linda wiped her eyes and said they had been barely surviving for years, racking up credit card debt just to buy groceries. Robert's mother had passed away 2 years ago but left them nothing, having disapproved of how Robert handled his life after my mother died. Linda's mother died 8 months ago and also left them nothing, having cut Linda off years earlier over the same disapproval. Now they were facing eviction from their apartment. Their cars had been repossessed. The utilities were getting shut off. They had nowhere to go and no options left. Paige's daughter was living in complete chaos, moving from couch to couch, sometimes sleeping in shelters. Robert looked at me with desperate eyes and said they knew I had done well for myself. He said he had heard through a mutual acquaintance that I owned a successful architecture firm. He said they came here because blood is thicker than water, because we are family, because despite everything that happened I had to help them. Linda wiped her eyes and said they had been barely surviving for years, racking up credit card debt just to buy groceries. Robert's mother had passed away 2 years ago but left them nothing, having disapproved of how Robert handled his life after my mother died. Linda's mother died 8 months ago and also left them nothing, having cut Linda off years earlier over the same disapproval. I asked one question, keeping my voice level. Where is the remaining $35,000 from my mother's life insurance money that was invested in Linda's business? The room went completely silent. Linda's crying stopped. Robert and Paige looked at each other. I waited. Linda stammered that the money was gone, spent years ago. I pressed harder. On what exactly? Paige blurted it out before Linda could stop her. Linda had used $20,000 of it for plastic surgery and a luxury car right after marrying Robert, a breast augmentation, a nose job, and a BMW. She wanted to look successful for her real estate clients. The remaining $15,000 had gone into the business before it failed, but not as a real investment, just absorbed into operating expenses and Linda's personal draws from the business account. Robert had known and had not stopped her. Not a single cent had been saved or invested properly for me like he had claimed. Then Robert admitted something even worse. He said when I was 16, he had taken out credit cards in my name using my social security number. He maxed them out, over $10,000 in charges, and never paid them. It destroyed my credit before I even turned 18. I had spent years rebuilding my credit in college, always confused about why it was so damaged when I had never had a credit card. Now I knew. I felt my hands shaking. I placed them flat on my desk to steady myself. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Linda started crying again and said they had made mistakes, but they were desperate. She said I had to understand that people do things when they are scared. Robert said they had nowhere else to turn, that I was their only hope. Paige just stared at me waiting, her face hard. I thought about my daughter Emma, 3 years old and safe and loved. I thought about the life I had built despite them, the success I had earned through my own work. I thought about Margaret, who had sacrificed to raise me when my own father did not want me. I thought about my mother's life insurance money that was supposed to be my future, spent on Linda's vanity and bad business decisions. Then I stood up and told them I would not give them a single cent. Robert's face went red. He started yelling, slamming his hand on my desk. He said I owed him for raising me, that he had fed and housed me for 14 years. I cut him off and said he owed me $75,000 plus 12 years of interest for stealing my inheritance, plus damages for identity theft. Linda started begging, saying they would be homeless. Paige screamed that I was heartless, that her daughter would suffer because of my selfishness. I stayed calm and laid it out for them. I told them they had abandoned me at 14 for a vacation. They had stolen my mother's gift to me and spent it on themselves. They had erased every trace of my mother from her own home. They had disowned me when I would not give up my scholarship for Paige. They had committed identity theft against me. They had maintained 12 years of complete silence until they needed something. Robert tried to guilt me one last time. He said my mother would be ashamed of me for turning my back on family. That was the final straw. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a folder I had been keeping for years, just in case. I spread the contents of the folder across my desk while they watched. Bank statements, credit reports, legal documents, all organized and labeled. I had been prepared for this possibility for a long time. I told them that after Margaret died, I had contacted Patricia Hernandez, the lawyer who had helped us when I was 14. She had guided me through filing a civil claim against Robert for the stolen insurance money and the identity theft. We had documented everything, gathered all the evidence, and filed a judgment. The statute of limitations had not run out because I had only discovered the full extent of the credit card fraud when I was 25, and requested all my financial records while applying for a mortgage. The fraud had been ongoing, with Robert making charges on cards in my name until the accounts were closed for non-payment when I was 19. I had a legal judgment against Robert for $93,000, the original $75,000 from the insurance policy, plus the credit card fraud amounts, plus interest calculated over the years. It was all documented and certified by the court. Robert's face went white. He sat down heavily in the chair. Linda looked like she might faint. I told them I had chosen not to enforce the judgment criminally. I did not want Robert in prison, not because I cared about him, but because I wanted nothing to do with any of them. I had built my life completely separate from them, and I wanted to keep it that way. So the judgment had sat dormant, just sitting there in case I ever needed it. But now they had come here demanding my help, insulting me, guilt-tripping me, and disrespecting my mother's memory again. So I was giving them a choice. They could leave my office immediately, never contact me again, never speak my name, and disappear from my life permanently. Or I could enforce the judgment. I could garnish any income they managed to earn for the rest of their lives. I could pursue criminal charges for the identity theft, which could still result in prosecution given the timeline. I could make their already difficult lives exponentially worse. I also told them I had been recording this entire conversation on my phone. In my state, only one party needed to consent to record a conversation, and I was that party. Their admissions about the plastic surgery, the car, the credit cards, all of it was documented now. If they tried to deny anything or retaliate against me in any way, I had proof. Robert looked broken. He started to say something, but I held up my hand. I told him he had a choice when I was 14. He could have been my father. He could have included me, valued me, protected the money my mother left for me. Instead, he chose Linda and Paige at every turn. He chose to abandon me, and when I succeeded anyway, he tried to sabotage my future. Every choice he made was about himself, never about me. I said I was making a choice now. I choose to protect myself and my family. I choose to not let them drain the life I built. I choose to honor my mother's memory and Margaret's legacy by being someone who does not reward cruelty and theft. Linda started sobbing again, saying they had nowhere to go. I told her that was not my problem, that there were social services and programs for people in their situation. I was not heartless. I was just not their solution. Paige called me a monster. She said I was letting a 7-year-old child suffer. I looked at her and said she should think about what kind of mother brings her child into a situation where they expect a man they abandoned and stole from to save them. I told her to look in the mirror before calling anyone else a monster. I picked up my phone and called security. I told them I had visitors who needed to be escorted out of the building and were not to be allowed back in. Robert stood up, his face a mix of rage and devastation. He said I would regret this. I told him the only thing I regretted was that it took me so long to fully accept that he was never going to be the father I deserved, but that I had made peace with it years ago. Security arrived, 2 professional men who sized up the situation quickly. They asked Robert, Linda, and Paige to come with them. Linda was still crying as they left. Paige shot me a look of pure hatred. Robert just looked empty, like something inside him had finally broken. The door closed behind them, and I sat down in my chair, my hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. I had done it. I had stood my ground. I had not let them manipulate me or make me feel guilty for protecting myself. I called Amanda and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished she said she was proud of me, that I had done exactly the right thing. She said she would leave work early and come to my office. Tyler knocked on my door a few minutes later, having heard from my assistant that something intense had happened. I told him a shortened version, and he just nodded and said he would clear my afternoon calendar so I could decompress. That evening at home, I sat with Amanda and Emma. We read books together before Emma's bedtime. I tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and told her I loved her. She said she loved me too in that sweet little voice that still melted my heart. After Emma was asleep, Amanda and I sat on the couch, and I told her the whole story in detail. She held my hand and said I had broken a cycle, that Emma would grow up with a father who showed up and chose her every single time. She was right. That was what mattered. I sat alone in my office after they left, my body still trembling from the confrontation. The recording was saved on my phone, proof of everything they had admitted. I backed it up to 3 different locations, just to be safe. Then I sat in silence for a long time, processing what had just happened. Security called me later to confirm Robert, Linda, and Paige had been escorted off the property and added to a list of people not allowed in the building. My assistant Sarah knocked gently and asked if I was okay. I told her I was, thanked her for handling the situation professionally, and said I would be leaving early. I drove home on autopilot, my mind replaying the conversation. Part of me felt guilty, wondering if I should have helped despite everything. That voice was quieter now than it had been when I was younger, barely a whisper, but it was still there. The voice that said maybe I was being too harsh, maybe I should be the bigger person. Then I thought about Emma, about the life Amanda and I were building for her, about the values we wanted to teach her. If Emma grew up and someone stole from her, abandoned her, destroyed her credit, and then showed up years later demanding help, what would I want her to do? I would want her to protect herself. I would want her to know her worth and refuse to be used. I was modeling that for her now, even if she was too young to understand. 3 days after the confrontation, I received an email. It was from Paige, sent from what looked like a library computer based on the generic email address. The subject line said, "Please read." I almost deleted it without opening, but something made me click. The email was different from the desperation in my office. Paige wrote that she had been thinking about everything that happened, about the years of choices her mother and Robert made. She said she was starting to understand that she had been a spoiled brat, who had never questioned why I was treated the way I was. She said Linda and Robert had poisoned her against me from the start, told her I was difficult and ungrateful, and she had believed them without ever thinking for herself. She apologized, not for the current situation, but for being part of making my teenage years miserable, for taking my room and laughing when they left me behind and calling me a loser when they demanded I give up my scholarship. She said she was sorry for not seeing me as a person back then, just an inconvenience. She said she was not asking for money. She said she understood why I refused, and that she probably would have done the same thing if their positions were reversed. What she was asking for was advice. She said she wanted to turn her life around for her daughter's sake, but she did not know where to start. She asked if I could point her toward resources, programs, anything that might help her become stable. I sat with that email for 2 days before responding. I talked to Amanda about it, talked to my therapist. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to maintain complete separation, but another part remembered being 14 and abandoned, remembered how much it mattered when people like Margaret and Mr. Harrison and Dr. Brown showed up and helped me. I sent a reply. I kept it brief and bounced. I told her I appreciated the apology, but that we would never have a close relationship. The damage was too deep. However, I was willing to provide information that might help her help herself. The email was different from the desperation in my office. Paige wrote that she had been thinking about everything that happened, about the years of choices her mother and Robert made. She said she was starting to understand that she had been a spoiled brat, who had never questioned why I was treated the way I was. She said Linda and Robert had poisoned her against me from the start, told her I was difficult and ungrateful, and she had believed them without ever thinking for herself. She responded the next day thanking me and saying she would look into everything I sent. I did not hear from her again for 6 months. Then I got another email with updates. She had enrolled in a nursing assistant training program through one of the workforce development services I had mentioned. She was 3 months into the program and doing well. She had gotten connected with social services that helped her find stable housing and childcare for her daughter. She was working overnight shifts at a grocery store while attending the training during the day. It was exhausting, but she was managing. She sent photos of a certificate she earned for completing the first phase of training. She thanked me again and said she was starting to believe she could actually build something better for her daughter. Over the next year, she sent occasional updates. She finished the nursing assistant program and passed her certification exam. She got hired at a hospital making decent money with benefits. She sent a photo of her daughter's report card showing improvement in school. The emails were never long, never asked for anything, just updates to show me she was following through. A year and a half after that confrontation in my office, Paige asked if I would be willing to meet her for coffee. I hesitated. Amanda said it was my choice, and she would support whatever I decided. I thought about it for a week before agreeing to meet at a neutral coffee shop halfway between our cities. I arrived first and waited, wondering if she would actually show up. She walked in 10 minutes later looking completely different from the bitter woman who had screamed at me in my office. She looked healthier, less exhausted, her clothes clean and professional. She sat down across from me and thanked me for coming. We talked for an hour. She told me about her life now, about how hard it had been to break old patterns and stop making excuses. She said facing the consequences of years of bad choices was brutal but necessary. She talked about her daughter, about wanting to be a mother who showed up and did better. Then she apologized again, but this time it was deeper and more specific. She apologized for specific incidents, like laughing when they left me behind and demanding my room and calling me a loser. She said she had been young and selfish and cruel, and that even though she could not undo it, she wanted me to know she recognized the harm she caused. I accepted her apology, but I was clear with her. I told her I respected the work she was doing to improve her life, but that we would never be close. The relationship was too damaged, and I had no desire to invite her into my life in any meaningful way. But I did not hate her, and I was glad she was doing better. She said she understood, and that was more than fair. She said she did not expect anything more than this one conversation, that she just needed me to know she was trying to be better. Before we left, I told her that if she finished her nursing certification and needed someone to pay for the exam fee, I would do that. Just that one thing. She looked surprised, and tears filled her eyes. She said she had already paid for it and passed, but that the offer meant more than I knew because it meant I believed she could actually do it. We parted ways cordially, but not warmly. I went home and told Amanda about the meeting. She said I had handled it perfectly, showing grace without compromising my boundaries. Over the next few years, I got occasional holiday cards from Paige with brief updates. She advanced in her career, became a registered nurse, moved into a better apartment. Her daughter was thriving in school. The cards were not warm or intimate, just factual. I appreciated that she respected the boundaries I had set. I never heard from Robert or Linda again after that day in my office. Paige mentioned in one email that they had moved to another state, living in a small town somewhere, surviving on Social Security and whatever part-time work they could find. She said Robert was bitter and angry, blaming me and the world for his situation. Linda had health problems from years of stress. They were both miserable, still convinced they were victims instead of architects of their own downfall. I felt nothing when I heard that. No satisfaction, no sadness, nothing. They had made their choices and lived with the consequences. I had no interest in their lives and no desire for updates. My life continued to flourish. The firm grew, we hired more designers, took on bigger projects. Amanda's engineering career advanced, and she became a partner at her firm. Emma started kindergarten, bright and curious and kind. We had a second child, a son we named William, who was now a year old. I made sure to be present for every moment of my kids' lives. Every school event, every bedtime story, every scraped knee and bad dream. I coached Emma's soccer team even though I knew nothing about soccer, just because she asked me to. I changed diapers and made lunches and showed up consistently because that is what fathers do. One evening, sitting on the back porch after the kids were asleep, Amanda asked me if I ever regretted how I handled the situation with Robert, Linda, and Paige. I thought about it honestly before answering. I told her I regretted nothing. Not refusing to help them, not enforcing my boundaries, not even helping Paige when she showed genuine change. Every choice I made was about protecting myself and my family while still maintaining my integrity. I learned that family is not defined by blood, but by who shows up for you. Margaret was more of a parent to me than Robert ever was because she chose me every single day. My friends who supported me through hard times were more like family than people who shared my DNA but abandoned me. I learned that forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. I forgave Robert in the sense that I stopped letting his choices poison my life. stopped waiting for an apology or explanation that would never come. But forgiveness did not mean letting him back into my life, or pretending the harm never happened. I could forgive and still maintain distance. I learned that setting boundaries is not cruel, it is necessary. When I refused to help Robert, Linda, and Paige, I was not being heartless. I was protecting what I had built, refusing to reward people who had stolen from me and abandoned me. There is no virtue in setting yourself on fire to keep people warm who would not do the same for you. I learned that some people will never take responsibility for their choices. Robert still believed he was the victim, that I owed him something, that his suffering was everyone's fault but his own. Linda and Paige had been the same way until Paige finally hit rock bottom hard enough to change. But Robert and Linda were still stuck in that cycle of blame. I could not fix that, and it was not my job to try. Most importantly, I learned that the greatest revenge is not cruelty but success and peace. Robert wanted me to fail, wanted me to need him, wanted me to come crawling back. Instead, I built a life so full and beautiful that his absence did not leave a hole. I became someone my mother would be proud of, someone Margaret was proud of. I became the father to my children that Robert never was to me. I broke a generational cycle. My kids will grow up knowing they are valued and chosen every single day. They will never question whether they matter to me. They will see a father who shows up and keeps his promises. If they make mistakes, I will guide them with love instead of abandoning them. That is the legacy I am building. Sitting there on the porch with Amanda, I felt genuinely at peace. The pain from my childhood had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something productive. It made me a better father, a better husband, a better person. It taught me empathy and resilience and the value of chosen family. Robert thought that by leaving me behind at 14, he was choosing his happiness. What he actually did was set me free to become someone better than he ever was. He lost a son who would have loved him if given the chance. I gained the clarity to build a life filled with people who actually deserve to be in it. That is the lesson I carry, and the lesson I will teach my children. You cannot control what people do to you, but you control how you respond. You can choose to be bitter, or you can choose to be better. You can choose to perpetuate cycles of harm, or you can choose to break them. You can choose people who drain you, or you can choose people who celebrate you. Most importantly, I learned that the greatest revenge is not cruelty but success and peace. Robert wanted me to fail, wanted me to need him, wanted me to come crawling back. Instead, I built a life so full and beautiful that his absence did not leave a hole. I became someone my mother would be proud of, someone Margaret was proud of. I became the father to my children that Robert never was to me. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who treated you poorly? How did you handle the guilt that often comes with protecting yourself from people you are supposed to love? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear your stories and perspectives on navigating difficult family relationships. If this story resonated with you, or made you think about your own relationships differently, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to hear more stories about overcoming challenges and building lives worth celebrating. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it is okay to choose yourself, that setting boundaries is not selfish, but necessary. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it gave you something valuable, whether that is comfort in knowing you are not alone in struggling with family issues or encouragement to stand firm in your boundaries. Remember that you deserve to be valued and chosen, and it is never too late to build the life you deserve. Take care of yourselves and each other.